back to the second part of the whole enchilada with James. I hope you had fun with the first part. This one should be even better. So, firstly, I want to talk about that right now. I wish I could put more effort into these and polish them up and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. It's just that most of the time I'm finding that it has to be at the end of the day I'm doing these, so I'm going to be all tired and not at the top of my game probably. Yet, I've been wanting to do this for so long that I just want to get the show on the road, as they say. And that there's already so many things I've seen I wanted to improve. Like all the phrases I kept repeating last time. It's just so hard when you see the slides that you just put together that you haven't had time to rehearse, and you're trying to remember all the things you want to connect while you're trying not to have long pauses and think of all these phrases you haven't said in years or things like that. So I just want to say thanks for your understanding, and I plan to keep improving it each step along the way. And that this is pretty much a rough draft. And I also want to say before starting out that up until about 8 or 10 years ago, I was just kind of going along with the mainstream. I had a lot of big thoughts, yet, now that I find myself here actually making this presentation and going along with it, it just kind of leaves me with this kind of weird feeling like, really? Like, like I'm kind of out of place, but it feels also kind of right. So along with this, especially this part's going to be big with synchronicities, and that's actually how I got the inspiration from this. And another big thing is that in life I've found a lot of light after a lot of darkness. That I found my spirituality after a lot of darkness that I had to go through. So this presentation's a little similar. We're kind of at the point where it's going to get darker before it's going to get lighter. Yet, like a doctor talking about a disease and a treatment, you want to go over the whole thing or the treatment doesn't make any sense. If we really want to know why. Because it might just be easy to say like, oh, vampires, but it does go a lot deeper than that, and there's a lot of interesting facets with it as well. So bringing it back to the green wooden dragon, this was actually last year's Chinese New Year, and it was on my birthday actually. And ever since then, I've been getting a weird stream of synchronicities and things like that kind of built up this idea that I have that I want to share. And first thing to look at is the dragon, like the Kundalini. Or this, especially in this picture, this green reptile. Because the Chinese dragon is a lot more like a snake because it doesn't have any wings. And in a very popular anime called Dragon Ball Z, there's a wish-granting green dragon called Shenron. And you have to collect all 7 Dragon Balls to summon him and get your wish. And you can compare those to the chakras. And not only that, but the sacred generative force as well. I think they're talking about that, with the Dragon Balls. And it's both, you have the obelisk and the White House. But in this case, it's more focusing on the tree or the wood, if you will. And another point I wanted to make is if you have a big room full of vampires, the most important thing to them is the generative force and source of life. Because in my opinion, there's nothing new happening in that room. It's just kind of automated, almost kind of like an AI. And that the ability to bring more life and consciousness and light is pretty much one of the most important things to a room full of vampires. And on the flip side, to us, the abilities it allows and the opportunities and doors it opens allows us to leave and not keep coming back and being trapped. And not only that, I'll go into the. Not only that, there we go. I'll work on that. So as we go, one of the focuses is that certain actors have recurring themes that they have over and over and over, and it's really interesting to see how some of those play out. Like Jim Carrey in The Truman Show, and he's also in The Mask. And this really got my attention with the whole Greenwood Dragon thing, because The Mask is basically a Looney Tunes superhero. And he puts on a green wooden mask to get his powers. And while I was researching this, I found out that it's the Mask of Loki. And it gets its powers from Loki, the trickster god. And in some of the later movies, they even have a Loki character. And it's very interesting, when the villain puts on the mask, it summons this electrical storm. I think it happens when Jim Carrey does it as well. So it's like directly related to Loki and plasma and storms as well. And it's kind of funny because they made more movies afterwards, and they all just got worse and worse and worse, referencing the source material that was way better. And in the new Loki series, I was talking earlier that he goes from the trickster god to becoming the god of storytelling and reality building. And in this scene right here, he's literally in the mind of God, like that strand of plasma is like the neurons in your mind. So he becomes like the creator of his own reality. And I was talking earlier about the multiverse models of reality in the water and the fire world. And when the multiverse opens up, it brings all this progress, but we also talked about how the monitors destroyed it. And in this Loki show, they have the same thing. They have this giant red plasma lightning cloud at the end of time that eats alternate timelines, because they get gunked up as well. If too many timelines show up, everyone's quality of life gets worse. Yet when the multiverse opens up, they all start fighting each other. That's kind of the trade-off, that you get all this innovation and awesomeness in the multiverse, yet you basically get infinite evil versions of yourself, or near infinite. And that's why they created very small, stable timelines, so that there's only one, the prime timeline I was talking about earlier. And the guy who made this one's called Kang, and he's the guy biting the apple in his gold accented palace. And I don't have a picture of it, but it's very interesting. For about half the series, he has the script of everything they're going to say, and he even points it out to Loki multiple times. But there's a point where they go off the script, like there's no more written, and then everything after that is newly written. And one of the other interesting things is he wants a successor. And I'll go into that later, but he is actually tricking Loki because somebody has to direct reality. Someone has to take up the mantle. And I'll get back to that later. Here's a Coliseum full of his evil versions getting all pumped up that they got a bunch of fun stuff to do now. And there's this show called Invincible that just aired a few weeks ago, its third season. And one of the big points of the series was that the multiverse opens up and all these evil versions of him come out and start trashing Earth. And I was talking about earlier, the torture, the singular timeline model was shown in Loki. The torch of light, you're bringing light to darkness, yet someone has to choose what that light is and where it goes. And later on in the series, the one timeline model also has the same problem as the multiverse. If there's too many branches, it weighs down the entire timeline. And in this, it starts spaghettifying. Like, it just turns into, like, spaghetti and disappears. Because there's not enough, bandwidth in the universe to support it anymore. And it's also very interesting, this character right here, because time travel starts happening in this. This guy is basically in, like, where we are, like 2020. He writes a book, and then hundreds of years later, it comes true. So Loki's literally living in a book as a fourth wall breaking character that this guy wrote hundreds of years ago, and now he's trying to save his timeline because, you know, the whole thing's turning into spaghetti. And the same thing basically happens in the never-ending story. The Great Nothing comes and sucks everything away, which is, you know, interesting after we were just talking about how reality might be like a pressure cooker, or our reality. And then Atreyu has to ride a dragon into the void to reset reality and bring everything back to the way it was. Yet he has the choice. And that one, they say they have to give a name to Care, or the princess, or, you know, the generative female Care. But that's basically saying, like, which version of reality do you want? You know, what story do you want it to be? And at the end of the Loki series, those are the strands of the mind of God, and they were dying, or they were just running out of energy. So he lights them up with green plasma on a golden throne and creates the Tree of Life timeline, or model of the universe, where it branches off and they're all kind of intersecting, and he becomes the new, like, top watcher because he's the one managing all these timelines. And originally he didn't want to do this, and I can kind of see why, because that's a lot of work. You can see why someone might get jaded with it and want to find someone else to take up the mantle after it's been an entire cycle. And I kind of want to take that to Groundhog's Day and being stuck in a cycle. And I also wanted to say here that this movie really started making me ask the question, like, how did he get out of the time loop? You know, because that idea repeats itself in what we've been talking about. And here on the left is an example of his last day there. Pretty much everything he did was selfless. That there's this kid that falls out of a tree and never thanks him. Yet, if he lets the kid fall, he breaks his leg, and he knows that. So he'll keep doing it anyway, you know, even if he's stuck there another day, because it's the right thing to do. And another interesting thing, I was thinking about what Groundhog Day means. And it's about looking at your shadow. And we keep talking about the two becoming one in a good way and a bad way. The dark has to become one as well with the light. I mean, if everything becomes one, then you know. So this basically is a movie called Free Guy. And, you know, you got the little nice 33 downtown right next to the pink rabbit right there. Is Groundhog Day in a video game or The Matrix? That this guy wakes up, and his name's actually Guy, which is funny enough. You know, like, he's a generic NPC in a video game, but then his AI wakes up one day because of love, or, you know, the generative care, and all of a sudden, you know, he's like an actual human being and starts waking up. And, you know, that says it there with the NPC. And the very interesting thing is they kind of have a reverse They Live glasses in it. It actually makes the world light up more, and you can actually see all the hidden things in the world and how it's like a video game. Kind of like seeing it like the code of the Matrix, so you can start getting powers over it and like that. And his world is like a Grand Theft Auto video game. It's all this violence. You're supposed to do all these mean, hurtful things to everybody. And he actually levels up and gets all these powers super fast by doing the right thing, which no one had been doing because they all thought it was just this, like, shoot-'em-up video game. And originally, the source code of the video game was supposed to be for, like, this paradise world. And they kind of hijacked the coding to turn it into that violent video game. And in the end, he has a choice of how he wants to reshape reality. So he kind of combines technology and plants and nature into like a more moral world, which is interesting. And we were talking about, you know, these glasses opening up this new world and possibilities in Free Guy. And in Ready Player One and with virtual reality, it's very similar. It opens up these doors to these parallel worlds and experiences you can have. And in Ready Player One, the government's trying to, or a private company's trying to take over the game world so it can monetize it and, you know, make everything awful. And the creator of the video game put a moral test into it to make sure the guy that gets to decide how the video game's going to go and be reshaped after he dies or, you know, moves on won't ruin the whole thing for everybody. And I like this one. In South Park, God puts a test in a video game, and he does it so that he can find someone to help him fight heaven versus hell, you know, or to find a balance. And it's funny because the character Kenny in that, there's a joke that, hey, you killed Kenny. And, you know, he's always coming back to life, which is very interesting. You know, he's always in the next episode like nothing ever happened. So this is a very interesting time loop movie. I basically look at it like the dark version of Groundhog Day called Coco Di Coco Da. If you type it in and that in full movie, there's actually a few free copies of it floating around on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's a very symbolic movie about being... So that's a sound box right there. So they basically get trapped in a song or a construct. And it's not them, but their daughter. So she disappears, and years later they end up going on this camping trip. Yet in the camping trip, they're stuck in a time loop. And it's a pretty messed up one that basically preys on their fears and humiliates them in all these different ways. And they have to learn to overcome their fears. And it's interesting because he's like saying, like, we're only playing. Like, this is only a play. Yet, you know, it's not very fun to be on the receiving end of it, in their opinion. And this whole thing has a Phoenix Rising motif, but also about transcending physical trauma in this world and learning how to bloom even after horrible things happen to you. And this movie is stuck with me since I've watched it years ago. Because the solution to the ending is, even though they both wake up and they were dreaming of the time loop, so they kind of have an idea it's happening. And the guy figures out it's happening for a while. And basically no matter what he does, like, it just keeps happening. Like, and he eventually starts trying to leave alone. And what ends up saving them is that he basically slaps her a whole bunch and like collapses his tent and drags her kicking and screaming to the car and drives off and doesn't even stop, to the point where she like wets her pants, since they did try stopping once and it wasn't far enough. Like, they thought they were out of the time loop, and then, oh hey, you know, the time loop shows up again. And this idea kind of contradicts a lot of time loop movies and things like Groundhog Day, yet it makes me think of like the idea of Jesus pushing over the tables in the temple. Like, that in the moment wasn't the nicest thing, yet if you're talking about the fate of people's eternal souls, then, you know, do you not push the table? Do you just keep letting them do it? And this makes me think of George Washington. I live in Washington State, so it's kind of like a weird parallel. That their family crest is Exus Acta Probat, and it basically means the end justify the means. And I think I've been thinking about that, and I'll contemplate it still, about the balance and the good and the dark side of it. Just because it can be used as a blank check for evil, does that mean it's just evil? Or are there cases where, yes, you know, I was actually listening to some guy talking about ontological evil the other day, and that if you're actually faced against pure evil and demons, then most other things by comparison aren't as evil, because it's not pure evil. So it's it's not a fun rabbit hole to go down, but it's something I think about because that's what this movie does. Because in the end, they do get out, they get past their trauma, and they're happy and their marriage is repaired. Their world was broken like Phil from Groundhog's Day, and they end up like the end of Groundhog's Day, leaving in love. They just went the other way around it. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was here that at the end of the movie, they hit that white dog right there. And that ends the time loop. Yet the time loop is retroactive because that dude's carrying the dog around every time they're in the time loop. And it just makes me think of the Sirius headlight in the Truman Show, because that's the dog star. And it was also interesting that the girls just, at the end of the movie, they just have a scene of her like in the black, stuck in the time loop with the little music box. And I've been thinking about it that, that's why I've been talking about that you can get stuck in the loop, and that you want to find a way where you don't just keep popping back into it over and over and over. What's the way to stop, all the trauma so it's a better thing? And I found this wallpaper of it that it's basically just this play happening, like he was saying, and that's being observed by higher beings. They're observing it. So it's just fractally happening. And it's all about learning lessons and, morality. And this kind of made me think of this famous quote from Batman: "You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain." And I don't think that's an absolute, yet I think that's something that can happen. And it happens to him in this movie, and he becomes Two-Face. And this also happens to the Chosen One in Star Wars, with Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader because he was tempted by the dark side. And it's also interesting that it follows a cyclical pattern too, that he falls to evil, but then Luke comes to the light. And then in the next movie, the guy that was supposed to be good falls to the dark, but then he comes back to the light. It just keeps on happening and happening and happening. And I'll go into this game much more later, called Dark Souls. Yet the same thing kind of... It's from a different angle, that if you do reset reality, that in the next cycle, you're the villain. Because you're kind of left over, that even if you did the right thing, that if you're the guy left over and reality's falling apart, then everyone's blaming it on you. And if they need to reset reality and you have to be out of the way to do that, then hey, you're now the villain. So it's kind of, and that also follows the hero's journey, that the hero's journey can also end in misery and isolation, and you kind of becoming the new bad guy. It's interesting, but there's also the flip side of that you can be the bad guy, and if you do the right thing, you're redeemed. Redemption and forgiveness. And they're also made out of blue plasma right there. And it's also interesting that, I imagine I've said it's also interesting many times now, we'll have to see in the future, that if there's not just the light and the dark, there's also gray Jedi. Which is a very interesting balance between it all. It's just usually a rarer thing. And before I leave the whole Star Wars thing, I always think of the Californication song by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And they say space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement, like Star Wars. And Alderaan's not far away. It's Californication. So, maybe the idea of that isn't as far away, and Alderaan, the jungle planet of life and love, was just a different cycle. So this is Zoolander, and at the end of the movie, this is his blue steel look, and it's basically force powers. And the funny thing is that there's a sequel to Zoolander where his son is the Chosen One. And, it's, once again, the downgrade. Yet, you have to make this face to gain superpowers, and there's this whole chosen one prophecy. And it's very interesting that the villain keeps talking about the chosen one, and at the end of the movie, he's like, the prophecy was all a sham. I was lying the entire time. And then, he does the face and gets superpowers, and he's like, oh my gosh, the prophecy was actually real. His intentions and their belief might have actually brought to real life. And not only that, this is, goes from forgotten to being remembered in a reality. Like, we don't remember dragons or magic, really. It's kind of buried deep in our subconscious, but, a lot of people would say, that's not real. And if it pops up, they'd be like, oh my gosh, So it's kind of interesting how it plays upon all of that. And that face is actually a meme in our world. People making that face. So it's just very interesting. And they're pre-programming people to make this face. And I want to take that into meme magic, because this also has to do with mass pre-programming. And this was huge during the last elections. And in 2016 especially. Yet the idea is, manifestation through memes. And this got really weird because this famous meme right here of a frog that really became a bannerhead of this is called Keck, and it's kind of has to do with an abbreviation for like laughing or funny. And that is this ancient, has these ancient roots. And it actually came to life and had all this traction, which was weird for something that was just a meme and most people think has no power to it. I'll go into this later, but, I've always loved memes. So it's interesting how it intersects with reality, and I keep talking about how our reality keeps getting less serious. So it becomes more and more of a circus clown show entertainment kind of thing. And there's even an Illuminati card game about the frog god. And, they don't really understand why, but it works, and it's been around for a while. And they also, connect it to, like, the, interdimensional reptilian motif that keeps popping up. And I always like this one. This happened about a decade ago, too, about this guy that basically said his local pastor was a shapeshifting reptilian, and he tried to take action against it, and he failed, and he ended up going to a maximum security prison, and the pastor ends up becoming a representative in the Idaho, House of Representatives. Yet, this all happened because this guy supposedly opened his chakras and got in tune with these beings, that want to harvest his light, and for him to become, their slave. So it's just interesting, like, that's like a mainstream story with people that are in their local Congress, and it's just like, what? Or at the time. This is a song that I like called Sweet Dreams. Wait. No, it's not Sweet Dreams. Well, the name of it doesn't exactly matter. You can look it up if you really want to. The big thing I look at is the moon and the anglerfish behind it, that it has the false light, and even the rainbow next to it. There's a lot of symbolism in the song too as well. Yet I kind of want to keep coming back to this moon theme because it's going to keep popping up, and it did yesterday with like the dead don't die, the moon bringing the dead back to life. And on the flip side with the sun, this is from Eminence Front, that these, if the sun did get brighter and the cycle did change, that the sun can have electrical magnetic pulses and EMPs, and even sunspots can mess with people's brains because our brains are electricity. So if the sun shines brighter, it can make you forget and mess up your memory and your motor functions and things like that. And not only that, forget they're hiding. And I was talking earlier about the Dark Forest theory and turning on this fusion power that now other people can see us that were already there. It's, like these parallel dimensions are already there. We just can't see them right now. And here's Lady Gaga, with all these decorations, with that theme coming back of the ram. And here's Mila Abramovich with next to the painting raising Lucifer's legions. And she's working with the HoloLens artificial reality. This is another one of her displays she did not too long ago that just makes me think of Matrix pods every time I see it. And it goes back to capturing what's the most important thing here. And if you've never seen the Gotthard Tunnel opening that was by Switzerland, oh, the amount of symbolism in that's insane. And it's a lot about this ram and the resetting and the opening of the veils and all this weird stuff and the sun shining and angels falling down. And it's very close to CERN, actually. And, the fun stuff with CERN having all the sixes. And they have Shiva out front, which destroys reality to create new ones. So it's a lot like the torch model earlier in Loki, that they have to destroy all these branches and timelines to create the one they want. And I love that, a few years ago, you can look up things like, oh yeah, it's totally not a portal to hell, guys, don't worry. And the old TED Talk talking about how quantum computers allow us to collaborate between parallel universes. And trying to figure out what exactly a quantum computer does, like looking into it, it's very wishy-washy. It's very magical, you could say. And then you have good old, Elon talking about how artificial intelligence is summoning a demon, and even how it doesn't even work out that great when you want to. And, he shows up with the armor of Baphomet on Halloween last year, which is very interesting. I always like this one that, you have 5G's the pentagram, and, they want to spread through the airwaves, which the god of this world in a negative way is. And then there's a very interesting conspiracy about how not only are the icons on computers sigils, that the very circuit chips themselves are sigils trapping light into matter to do their bidding. Just like the demons of Solomon. Now we have, demons inside of computers or silicon. And your emails actually run on daemon services. Like, they don't really call it that much anymore, but that's what daemon tools do, is they send messages primarily. As you can see right there, it's Gmail right there, and Facebook. It's and then earlier on, Windows, the window or the gateway, especially with duality in the cube, and the bit and apple all put together, this theme keeps popping up over and over and over. And there's this iconic old video game called Doom, where in the future they turn on an infinite power generator and it opens up a portal to hell. And it's very interesting that the demons in this series are merged with technology as well. And the final boss of this series is himself. Like, an evil version of himself rules hell in his world. It's very interesting. And in a lot of video games, where there might be a lot of truth, this blue plasma beam allowing aliens to come into their world and creating a portal happens a lot. It happens in an old game called Half-Life. This is the Halo franchise that was huge in my childhood. And before I go any further, a big part of that series is that you could think of basically like the angels or the elves came before us, and they were given a moral, they call it the mantle of responsibility, that they're supposed to shield and fight against darkness and help younger civilizations rise up. It's just they kind of fumbled it and didn't want to do it and were too proud. And basically humanity's had to go up alone in the universe, and the darkness is starting to rise, and they didn't really get the training. And that just kind of makes me think of, our story of fallen angels that were too prideful to watch over us and try to help us in our journey of evolution, through the darkness and learning with it. This is a Stephen King novel turned into a movie called The Mist, where a portal to another dimension's opened up and these giant monsters come out. And back to the pressure cooker idea of our reality, if it did do that, I don't know the exact science, but if you go watch Jay's channel, that it creates a whole bunch of mist. And not only that, but mud as well. And if you go back to the Never-Ending Story, there's a part in that movie where he has to go to a very misty swamp. And there's a lot of other movies like that, like The Princess Bride. There's a giant rat swamp filled with mist. So it's very repeating in this theme of that. And the reason that these monsters came and the portal was made was Project Arrowhead, and the logo for these and the projects like it are thunderbolts. So it has to do with this plasma. When the plasma comes down, when the thunder's opened up, that's when these things appear. These lovely, beautiful chaps. This movie, Event Horizon, was about faster than light travel. And it turns out that to do faster than light travel, you have to go into hell. They don't know that until they go, and it doesn't work out very well. And it reminded me a lot of Hellraiser, that there's this there's parallel good and bad dimensions, and you don't always know what you're going to get when you open these windows or gateways or portals. And the people on the other side, they're pretty happy to come on through and party. And I was talking, one of the hobbies I had earlier, and this has been around in my life for 20 years, called Warhammer 40K. It's this sci-fi universe, and the main point is that alongside our dimension is called the warp, or the immaterium, and our consciousness and all our emotions are reflected there, and it's the home of demons. And the demons in that reality for the last 10,000 years have basically manipulated reality to create never-ending war, so they can just keep feeding and feeding and feeding. And they're faster than light travel in this universe is going through that dimension. So they like to go faster than light in their universe and gain infinite energy and all that. They have to shield themselves against hell itself. And that series is becoming very prominent in the mainstream as well. And they say that Event Horizon is an unofficial prequel to the Warhammer 40K universe. And that kind of brings me to Stargate, where we have this blue water portal that allows them to traverse to other civilizations and is connected to the Egyptians, which I'll go more into later, how that keeps coming up and up again. And the Stargate logo is pretty much verbatim the square and compass of Freemasonry. And here we have Ghostbusters, where the portal between realities is opened up at the pyramid. And the light at the top, kind of like the dollar bill when the capstone's not there. And the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was an egregore of their deepest fears come to life and manifested because there was so much energy and this doorway was opened up to this energetic realm. And the reboot that's not as good, that has, a blue plasma storm there, that directly in the trailer referenced Abaddon and the bottomless pit opening up. So this is from one of those video games I used to play, Call of Duty, where they added in the zombie mode, and it started with the Nazis. And just a quick point, on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is one of the biggest pre-programming podcasts in the world, he was talking to Sam Tripoli, which is one of the largest approved mainstream conspiracy theorists in the world, was saying that in World War II, that the Nazis made pacts with interdimensional aliens to gain more technology, and a byproduct of that was our national parks became abduction grounds and experimenting areas that they could use. And just as like a disclosure pre-programming thing, that's the biggest platform they have to disclose things, and they chose to do that a few years ago. So I find it interesting. It goes back to the Nazis, and they got the zombie technology. Well, people turned into zombies when they started messing with infinite energy technology that they got from aliens. And not only aliens, interdimensional tentacle aliens that are summoned through our reality through relics that create portals that you have to use in rituals to do it. And their specialty is finding happy, peaceful realities and opening up these blue wormholes so these giant monsters that look like they're exactly out of the Marvel movies can come and, fill their tum-tums. And it just makes me smile that this all just goes back to this video game I used to play. And, there's no zombies in this video game. It's all just about the normal world. Yet as it goes on and the sequels go, not only does it get worse than the original, it adds on, interdimensional beings trying to eat our reality again. And it's all of time mashing up against each other. So you have the Templars that originally opened it up to the Nazis, and it goes all the way to the future past that to moon bases and opening up portals there. And, we're back to the moon raising zombies. And here's a screenshot from one of the games of hellhounds coming through portals. So it's not just zombies, it's aliens, it's hell, it's these weird tentacle monsters. And the tentacle monsters in this look almost exactly the same as the tentacle monsters that were shown in Stranger Things. And in Season 2 of Stranger Things, they have a particle collider that they use to open up a door to hell. And when it's opened up, it can start possessing people and controlling their bodies. And in the first season, it was all about the Montauk Project and using psychic people to bridge open these gaps to these alternate realities that allowed these things to start coming through. This is the movie Legend with Tom Cruise, and one of the big points of the movie was capturing the final unicorn so that evil could have its power. Yet in this model, evil is harvesting all the cryptids from the world so that no normal person sees them. And this movie's coming out in a few months, or actually a few weeks, I think, about how the world's normal, but then they find a unicorn horn and they're trying to monetize it and, make medicine, and it starts releasing all these cryptids, and they don't like that. And this is one of my favorite video games about how the government contains these aliens and abnormal artifacts to maintain the status quo of our world with deep underground military bases. And this is one of my favorite movies of all time, called Cabin in the Woods. It's about an underground military base that's in connection with the fallen angels, and they're given every technology ever. And this is very interesting that it manifests as everything. So you have ghosts, ogres, the clown monster, giant insects, snakes, werewolves, and at the end they all get released at once. And this was happening so that the giant titans underneath their feet that were hidden from them wouldn't come up. As long as they were entertained with blood rituals, with the technology they gave them to entertain them, they would stay down there. Yet when they fail to do their blood ritual, they rise up and reset the world. And it goes back, to the desert giant world. And this is the Resident Evil series. It starts out as a zombie series about a biological weapon called the T virus that could be anything. It's basically just a genetic virus, but they're like, oh hey, we can make people become undead with it. Let's do that. It always ends well. And funnily enough, their logo is the same as a biotech lab in China, very close to Wuhan. And their logo is basically the Knights Templar, which we just covered is linked to zombies rising. Yet it goes farther than that, and they keep tinkering with the virus. They end up calling it the G virus because, insane rich people want to live forever and create the perfect life form organism. So, they start having fun with that. Yet the problem with this is that it starts bringing these genetic abominations and monsters that, in the bottom right, that look like dragons into the real world because it's mutating things like that. And what the evil people are called the Umbrella Corporation. They've built underground facilities under every major city, and they're trying to hide in cryosleep hibernation so that they can come out after the dust is settled of the zombie apocalypse and rebuild order in the world and be the new ones in charge. And they call the main one they hide in the hive. And this movie's called They Clone Tyrone. This one's actually really funny. It was on Netflix. That underneath his hometown, there's a deep underground military base. And one day, he sees one of his clones get shot. So he follows it down into the military base. And they find the elevator down into the military base through a Jesuit church. And he's a clone, so the original version of them is trying to genetically combine the races into one. Combine the light and the dark and all of that and just create, a new superior being. And they're running all these tests and pre-programming on the people there and just keep replacing them like they're in like a reincarnation loop. This is one of the most prophetic games ever made, called Deus Ex. The start of the game is the Illuminati talking to each other that they just created a fake global pandemic around a engineered virus, and that they're controlling the medicine around it to control the world. And they have men in black and robots and AI. And the whole goal of the Illuminati in this is to combine with artificial intelligence under Area 51 and then rule the world. And they even genetically engineered the gray aliens, which is a very interesting tidbit to add. So a little sidestep here. This is Alien versus Predator. And the plot of this movie is that a heat beam creates basically a rabbit hole through the ice wall. And humans go down there and they find this black pyramid. And this black pyramid was brought by the reptilian-looking aliens to create basically a giant contest/game show and hunt where they take the alien and they use real human beings to create all these xenomorph monsters to create this big battle. And I always love that there's this tweet from Buzz Aldrin that there's a pyramid mountain in Antarctica that is evil itself. And it's interesting, that you're not allowed to go there, and every country won't allow you to do that. The Thing is one of my favorite movies ever. And it's about this shape-shifting alien that's buried in the ice at Antarctica that needs human beings to propagate itself. I think this is one of the greatest examples of, I love watching this movie. Yet to be in The Thing, that's one of the last movies most people would want to be in. So it's kind of interesting how it has that dual level. This is a movie called Vivarium, so basically that little kid right there, he is basically evil incarnate. He's this artificial evil being, and he pretends to be a real estate salesman. So he gets you to sign up. He's like, hey, come live over here in my home. And then you go there and you think it's all great and fine, but then it turns out to be like this false reality. And Vivarium is kind of basically a fish tank for live animals, and especially human beings, to observe them. And it's also kind of a poke at like McMansions and the suburban lifestyle. Yet below that, it's about like the false construct of reality. And no matter how much they try to escape, it just keeps looping back. And their house is number 9 as well, so it keeps looping back to number 9. And no matter how far they try to go, even the sky is fake, which is interesting. They can't get out because it's a construct. And this is the creepy salesman. And he has reality bending powers. Like, he's not a normal thing. And the younger version of himself that he needs them to raise, because he basically makes them stay there and raise his baby to continue the cycle. This is a movie called Coraline. Notice the moon behind her. You can't see it in this one, but there's like a giant claw over her. And in her house, he finds a doorway to another world during the night. And there are perfect copies of her parents. Maybe not perfect, but very similar copies of her parents that have these black buttons for eyeballs. And they're trying to get her to stay there, like tempt her to stay there. But the deal is she has to give up her eyes and get buttons sewn in over her eyes as well, and then she becomes a plaything in their reality. And it turns out that her other mother is a shape-shifting, blind spider being that can mess with reality and is trying to keep her there. And she ends up escaping. It's just very interesting. This is a movie called The Society, about the main character is a part of this rich family, but he never fits in. And he goes on this journey of basically wondering if the world he's in, everyone's basically evil or he's crazy. And everyone around him's just gaslighting him like crazy. But then he finds out that all of his parents and friends that are rich are actually shape-shifting entities that they have these big parties and they can't shape-shift without energy. So they get people, innocent people, and then they use them in a ritual and basically just, devour them so that they can have their shape-shifting party. And, they're saying, like, the rich have always ate the poor. So it's, and I always like this one because he's like, look, I'm a butthead. You can actually be a butthead. This is another Netflix movie called The Ritual. So they're on this hike, and one of them breaks their leg, so they decide to take a shortcut. And unfortunately, the shortcut they take leads them to this cabin in the woods that has these altars, and they all have these weird dreams, and it just goes downhill from there. It turns out there's a shape-shifting entity that is a son of Loki, actually, that feeds on people, but not only people, their trauma. And it's especially, it eats most people, or it sacrifices most people. Like, it doesn't actually physically eat people. It just, like, sticks them up on a tree and, just lets them die. Because it feeds off their misery and can actually, like, read their memories and mind. And the main character of it, it doesn't want to kill. It wants him to live there forever. Like, there's a little village with, like a dozen or two people there that it's chosen over, like, 200 years to, like, live there with it. There's stuff from, like, the settlers back there. And it allows them to live longer so it can keep feeding off their misery. And so it wants him to kneel. And he doesn't. And it's actually in the attic, there's all these, like, mummies, but they turn out to still be moving. Like, it's still keeping these mummified husks trapped in this, in this house of, this shape-shifting child of Loki. And eventually, all he needs to do escape is just run far enough. Like, it's bound in the forest back here with all these runes. Like, it's stuck in this area, this forest it's in. And if you just figure out how to leave and you don't bow to it, you can just walk away. It's thought-provoking. Clash of the Titans, where in the first movie the main villain's the Kraken. We'll get more into that later about we've talked about tentacle monsters. It's reappearing in the movies. They make a special point to say that the gods need humanity, that the gods get weaker as humanity stops praying to them. So they're almost like egregores that are powered by us. And it goes back, I call them the small g gods, because they don't have that hookup to divine source. They have to be vampires with it. They have to build temples and make people worship them so that they can keep living. They have to steal that energy. This is a great movie called Jupiter Ascending. So in this one, interdimensional alien, or they do it with the solar system, but they go through portals as well. Aliens that look like humans, that are basically elves, seeded Earth and are about to harvest it because they can melt us down into juice that lets them live forever. And they just have, they just live in giant ballrooms in space all day with their big fancy parties, and they just juice entire worlds so they can keep doing it. And not only that, they keep reincarnating as well. And that's how she can control bees, is because she's like the reincarnation of their old queen. And that keeps coming back and back and back. And in this, they have gray aliens, and their powers are being invisible and changing your memory. So they're like the foot soldiers that were created for evil. And their lieutenants are Draco reptilians that are carnivores. So there's like this interesting hierarchy that they have. And this was a movie called Captive State, which was interesting because they did it from the biological side. So instead of a lot of the drones in the sky were actually like biological aliens. And the chip you had in you was like a little tiny alien. So, and they were here and they lived underneath us, and they wanted our resources, and they wouldn't come up and bug us as long as we kept just sending them more resources down there. And this was kind of the flip point, that they were always there, but there was a point where they eventually were like, all right, we're going to come up to the surface and kind of go back to the old antediluvian model so that we can have all your stuff, much like Independence Day, this scavenger idea. All right, well, that was part 2. I hope you enjoyed it, and next time we'll go even deeper into that and some other fun ideas, and a little peek of Westworld next time. So, yeah, thanks for joining me, and have an awesome time till next time. Peace.